In life in general, and in gaming in particular, we have the capacity to collect a lot of stuff. And of course, situations change. We might lose interest in a particular era or style of wargaming. We might move house. Boxes get put into boxes. Those boxes get put into lofts, into the back of sheds and tucked away, and can sometimes stay there for years and years without ever being seen again. And then it might be that your circumstances change again. You could be moving house, or you might just even be having a clear out, and you move some stuff and you find that box and you open it, and there's that other box in it, and you open that and you go, oh, I forgot that I had those. Yes, today on Dragon's Teeth we're talking about forgotten treasures. Hi, I'm Rob Poyton. Thanks for joining me today. Now, you may remember, if you've been following the channel for a while, that last year I cleared out my shed, which was full of collectibles, in order to create a gaming space, somewhere to play games, somewhere to paint, somewhere to do my filming, and so on. And in doing that, of course, I did discover some things that I'd forgotten I'd had. One of those was a box of figures. So what I'm going to do today is show you that box and what was in it, because when I opened it, it was surprising on two levels. One, for the figures inside, but two, what had happened to the foam within. These are some of the first figures that I had. In fact, I remember buying one or two of these in particular back in the day at the new Model Army shop in Manor Park in East London. Now, I don't know who manufactured all of these figures. I've got an idea for some of them. So part of this also as well is to see if anyone out there recognises these and can let me know the manufacturer. Anyway, let's take a look. This then is what I discovered. It's a Dragon Tower figure carrying case that I'm guessing I bought probably early 80s. I had a quick look online for Dragon Tower, couldn't find anything about them, so I guess that company is no longer in existence. And this was one of the first, or certainly first, that I'd seen foam carrying cases where you can put your figures in the little slots in the foam inside and carry them about safely, which I did for many years. Of course, then it got put at the back of the shed at some point and forgotten. And when I discovered it and opened it, well, I've taken the figures out, but you'll see why. Because this had happened. Now, that looks like it might make a good sort of diorama for some sort of dungeon or Indiana Jones movie, perhaps. But basically, the foam has totally sort of rotted away. Never seen that before. I presume maybe it got a bit damp or something like that, but that's what happened. And I'm making no complaints about Dragon Tower, by the way, because, as I say, this is, well, at least 40 years old, if not more, and I got a lot of use out of it. So there's a little lesson in there for us that when you store your stuff, make sure that it's, you know, in a dry environment. Any damp, even with this stuff, could potentially cause damage. So that's the state of the case. What about the figures inside? So here's an example. This is a sort of a Solomon Kane type adventurer figure, 25mm. And I don't know if you can see there that a lot of that foam has got stuck in all the little crevices between the legs, under the hat. I have given this one a bit of a clean already, but basically all of the figures were sort of coated in this rotting foam. It's something quite Lovecraftian almost. So the first thing I've had to do is try and clean these off. And I found that just using a soft cloth has managed to get rid of most of it. And I used a soft toothbrush as well to really try and get into those little nooks and crannies. So as you can see, the stuff comes off very easily. But, you know, I didn't want the paint to be coming with it if I sort of rub too hard or use something more abrasive. So there's still some clean-up work to be done on these, but what I thought it might be interesting to do is just show you these figures, because there's some here that I remember buying, and I know who the manufacturer is. There's others I haven't got a clue who they're manufactured by. So would be very interested in finding out. So what I'll do is just get the rest of the figures out now, and we'll go through each of them in turn. So here's our first figure, and this is one that's quite special to me because as far as I can remember, this was the first ever fantasy figure that I bought. At that time, again, we're talking late 70s. I've been into World War II wargaming for quite a while, but then of course Dungeons and Dragons and everything else came out. I was a big Conan fan, so when I saw this, I had to have it. And this is a figure by Barry Minot. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Minot or Minot, who's an English figure sculptor. He set up in the mid-70s and did quite a lot of fantasy stuff. He had a few ranges. Probably his most well-known was a series of figures called Thane Tostig, who was a sort of Saxon warlord. And he actually invented his own game around this. There was a set of rules out at the time. And I do have several of those figures still. But I'd actually forgotten about this one. This was from a range, I believe it was called Heroic Age. And it was Conan, basically. There were also figures for Red Sonja and various other Robert E. Howard characters. And one thing that I loved about this was the pose. Now, miniatures back then could be less detailed than we see today, particularly with the advent of 3D printing. But I think this one is really well detailed. And what particularly struck me with this figure as well with the pose, I thought that's a real good Conan action pose. I believe that Barry Minot also went on to do some Napoleonics figures, and I think in the 80s there was like a Sherlock Holmes range as well. So he was quite sort of prolific at the time, and I believe he sort of moved from figure work into film work, designing props and things for sets in films. And I believe he ended up working at Elstree, where he worked on films like Raiders of the Lost Ark. So as I say, Minot was quite prolific at the time. I think there was also a range called Olympian Heroes, which was gods and heroes from Greek myth. In fact, I've seen one of those up on eBay recently. I'm not sure what price that was going for, but you know, I guess these things are real collector's pieces now. Speaking of Sherlock Holmes, we now have these two figures. The great detective himself, that I believe is a grenadier figure. And this, I love this one. This is a really nice version of, well, Dracula. It's got to be Dracula, right? So, as I said, the Sherlock is Grenadier, and we would have been using that in Call of Cthulhu, I imagine. The Dracula, I have no idea who that manufacturer is, so I would be very pleased to find out. As you can see at the base of that Sherlock there's still a lot of gunk to clean up. But again, a very nice pair of figures, particularly that Dracula. So I mentioned fantasy figures. Of course, I was playing a lot of D&D at the time. So this is a group of what you might call dungeoneers or adventurers, and a monster there, the rather lovely goat-headed chap. Again, I don't have a clue who these figures were. I'm guessing perhaps Citadel, maybe Grenadier. I think Raoul Parther was around at that time. But see, the sword has broken off of that rather imposing figure, unfortunately. So again, I'd be very interested to hear if anyone knows the manufacturer for these figures as well. Another quite splendid looking barbarian and a sort of heavy duty fighter there. I see the goat's head theme was obviously popular, from an actual goat's head to an emblem on a shield. And here's a couple more Dungeoneers. We've got another nice charging barbarian there. I think that's possibly the same manufacturer as that previous one. And here's a very nice figure. I think this might be Citadel. That's a bard. Obviously he's got his lute and his sword ready. But it wasn't all fantasy. I was also into samurai skirmish games at the time, as I've mentioned elsewhere on the channel. So here's a couple of very nice samurai figures. Again, with these, not a clue. I know Dixon's did a lot of samurai at the time. I'm not sure that they're Dixon's figures, but yeah, very nicely done. Again, good strong poses and nicely detailed. Again, another fantasy figure here, a rather splendid wizard. possibly Citadel again. I'm just guessing here. And I think this one is billed as a thief. He's got the little rope at his waist there. But I thought, doesn't he make a good Igor? Every evil wizard needs an assistant. Now, the nice thing with those figures is you can use them for fantasy, but they also fit in nicely with Call of Cthulhu, which we mentioned earlier with our Sherlock Holmes. Well, even Sherlock had assistants, right? And of course, no investigator goes into the old house on their own. So we've got a couple of Call of Cthulhu investigators here as well. And I'm pretty sure these will be Grenadier as well. I think they did some sets of Cthulhu figures back in the day. So there we are. There's a nice little collection of antiques, antique figures, retro, I don't know, classic figures. I was especially pleased to find that Conan one. As I say, that was pretty much the first D&D or fantasy type figure I ever bought. That was at New Model Army, which was a shop in Manor Park. Very great war game shop that I've spoken about before on the channel. And these others probably would have been from Game Centre or Games Workshop when that first opened. You know, when it used to be, well, no, let's not go there. But yeah, a very good group of figures. I'll add these to my collection indoors now, clean them up a bit more and make sure they go in, well, foam boxes again, but ones that are stored in a nice dry environment this time. And if anyone does have any info on any of those figures, please do let me know. I'll be very interested to hear exactly what some of those manufacturers are, particularly that Dracula, because I do like that one. So there we go then. That's my particular set of forgotten treasures. I did find one or two other bits as well that I'd sort of forgotten I had, but they were mostly books and some rule sets. And I'm pretty convinced, especially with rule sets, that, let's face it, they're quite small and quite thin, could possibly still be tucked away in one or two boxes I've yet to go through at the back of the shed there. So who knows what further discoveries await. As I mentioned at the start, please do let me know if you recognise the manufacturers of any of those figures I wasn't sure of. And I'd be very interested to hear all about your forgotten treasures as well. What's the best thing you've found that you've forgotten you had? Thanks for watching again. As always, please do like, share and subscribe. And I'll see you next time.